So one of the most talked about, if not the most talked about movie of 2024, I don't know that's available, has finally come out. It's time to find out if the wait was worth it and it is legit, or if it was just all hype. So Wicked is the musical film adaptation of the Broadway musical Wicked that came out back in 2003, which that musical is actually based off the 1996 novel Wicked, which was written by Gregory Maguire. The movie stars Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, who would later be known as the Wicked Witch of the West, and Ariana Grande, who plays Glinda, who would later be known as Glinda Good Witch of the North. Now, I'm sure I don't have to go into detail for anyone who is a fan of the Wizard of Oz franchise, or anyone who has read the book or seen the Broadway show for Wicked, but for those who are watching who haven't read or seen any of those, or, isn't really a fan of Wizard of Oz, but decided to go to see this movie for the fun of it, here is like a little premise here. So pretty much the story is, as what I said, it's about, the Wicked Witch of the West and, of course, Glinda Good Witch of the North. It's essentially supposed to tell their backstory. It is a prequel to the Wizard of Oz itself and how they became known as who they are when we saw them in The Wizard of Oz. So basically, it's supposed to show how Glinda Good Witch became like this.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
And how the Wicked Witch of the West became like this.
I'll get you, my pretty.
So as the name suggests, the movie is essentially about Elphaba. She is the main character here because it is to tell her side of the story, because we all know her as the Wicked Witch. But the truth is, in this story, it tells as to whether was she really wicked? Was she really evil? I mean, yes, Glinda plays a huge part into who she became to be, of course. But the real question is, was she really what people say she was? Or was it just, propaganda and rumors were made about her because she knew the truth? Let's start with the main topic here of this film, other than the story, of course. And that is the two actresses playing our two main characters, Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. And their performance can only be summed up in one word. It is outstanding. They have amazing chemistry in this movie. They are complete opposites of each other, and they play their characters so well. I mean, Cynthia Erivo playing Elphaba, who is, the smart, outcast, ostracized girl. And then you have Ariana Grande playing Glinda, who is essentially, the Oz version of Mean Girls. I mean, she's popular, she's extrovert, she's outgoing. I mean, she's essentially the queen bee character of this movie. The only thing is that the one thing she wants more than anything, she does not have. And the person who does is, of course, the outcast Elphaba. Honestly, their dynamic here is also not just, outstanding. It's very interesting at that. It's not like that usual, best friends become enemies moment. I mean, it's like we have a fully developed character in Elphaba who meets a still developing character in Glinda, or Galinda, whichever one you want to call her, because she has a lot more growth in this movie than I was expecting. I mean, I really wasn't expecting that part. And also, Ariana Grande was surprisingly a standout. I mean, she does a really good job. And I guess what people were saying throughout, the promotions, that no one else could be playing Glinda other than her. I mean, I don't know. I don't know really much about Ariana Grande. I don't listen to any of her music. Not that I hated her or anything. It's just that her music really isn't my cup of tea. I was more rock, not pop music. Still, there are moments in this movie where you are actually rooting for her, and you're also rooting for Elphaba as well. I mean, this is a movie where you root for both girls to succeed. Usually, it's like you're rooting for one to succeed. You're on this side of the fence or on this side of the fence, but you root for both of them. You're rooting for Elphaba to become accepted and just like everybody else, and you're also rooting for Glinda to become the good person that we all know she is, or has the good that is inside of her that we all know she has. It's essentially a movie where you want both of them to succeed. Also, this movie didn't short on the musical part, because this is essentially, I knew this was essentially a musical, just in film format, but I mean, there were times when I was hearing it, I was like, could we, stop with the music for just 5 minutes and just continue with the story? There were moments like that. But I mean, I know they were doing songs from the Broadway story. I don't know if every song in here was an original song from the Broadway show, but I mean, if it is, then I was like, wow, that's a lot of singing you gotta do for one story. One flaw I feel about this movie that is essentially almost 3 hours long, it is essentially 3 hours of nothing but setup. The setup, though, that we are watching isn't essentially, though, like some part that actually just leaves you hanging, like at the very end. You're like waiting constantly. It's like we get set up, like we just saw the first act of the play, and now we are going to get act 2, next year. And what really feels bad about this setup is because it really opens the door to a lot of things when they're exploring a lot of interesting plot points here. Not just in, Glinda and Elphaba's relationship or the possible romance between, Elphaba and, the Prince Feria, who is played by Jonathan Bailey. They're exploring things like, animal cruelty and, the essential points of people in power and how they can abuse that power. And honestly, also the point as to whether who has a strong enough will to, exploit something that they know is false, or somebody who just knows how to go along with a lie. I mean, there are a lot of interesting plot points here that they can essentially follow in the next part of this, part of this, show, or, Broadway adaptation, whichever one you want to call it. And, at the same time, it doesn't leave you hanging. I will say that with how invested I was in this movie, how long it actually was, it actually didn't feel like that at all. I was so invested in this movie that, when I saw it said to be continued, I'm really looking forward as to where they are going to take this now. Because, I mean, there are friends of mine who are into Broadway and also read this book. They already know where it's actually going to go, and they've actually mentioned it to me. And I'm essentially curious how they are going to put that into this film. Because this was essentially set up to get the audience, thinking about what's going to happen. But the real grand scale of the climax is going to happen in the next part. It's kind of like what happened with Dune. Dune Part 1 was the build-up for what we got in Dune Part 2 in February. So, I mean, it's essentially, got me thinking. Like, what is going to happen? How are they going to put this into Part 2? Overall, though, the movie has great chemistry, a great story, and, the musical adaptation was great. Oz looks, of course, grand, as always. And for a movie that was, entertaining and a great build-up and setup movie for another part of it, this movie definitely does its job. It's just that, I kind of wish we had gotten maybe a 30-minute intermission and then got part 2 right after with how invested this part 1 was. But of course, we're going to have to wait for that. So right now, I can only grade part 1. And right now, I'm grading part 1 as an A here. I'm hoping part 2 is just as good, or if not even better than what we got here. All right, well, that just about wraps up this review. If you guys have seen Wicked Part 1, please comment here down below what your thoughts were on it. Also, if you like my other videos, you can check out here more on my channel. And always remember to stay epic.